Happy API Heritage Month. Today I'm going to be doing a video talking all about my favorite Asian American books. Now, before I jump into all of the book recommendations, I first off want to say that although I am going to be talking about books written by Asian or Asian American authors, it's still important to also highlight Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians and their stories. I feel like every May there is a huge focus on Asian Americans and celebrating Asian Americans and not enough for Pacific Islanders. And it's important to celebrate both and make space for both. However, it was my personal project to read more books by Asian Americans after I graduated college, now that I have a lot more time to read. So because of that, I only have books by Asian authors. I will link some books by Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians down in the description box so you can get the best of both worlds. The reason why I say this is although there are some similarities between Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, they both experience very different things and come from different backgrounds. Thus, they would need different needs. For example, in health, both groups experience very different health needs, and by putting them under a single statistic, the group will not get the specific attention that they need. And a little bit about me, because I will talk about some of my experiences and what resonated with me as I read the books I'm going to talk about. I am Filipino American. I moved here from the Philippines when I was 3, but every 3-ish years I would go back to the Philippines and I would live there for a year. I would go to school and I would go live with my aunts and grandma while my parents stayed here to work. I understand Tagalog perfectly, and I would say that I am fluent, but because I haven't been speaking a lot of Tagalog, I feel like I'm starting to forget the language, which saddens me, but there are multiple ways that I still connect with my culture and roots. With that being said, let's jump into the very first book that I'm going to talk about, which is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This book follows the family of Mia and Pearl. They live a very nomadic lifestyle. They move from place to place a lot. Similar to me growing up, I always moved after a year. They settle into Sugar Heights, Ohio, and live in a pretty wealthy neighborhood where they meet Mrs. Richardson. Her family is a pretty wealthy family. They're well off. They live in a nice gigantic house. And Pearl, the daughter, gets very acquainted with the family, in which Mia has her own opinions about. The Richardsons, even though they are well-intentioned as well as all the other families in Shaker Heights, they are very privileged and don't fully understand. Oh, is it raining? I hope the audio doesn't pick this up. They fully don't understand the complexities of different issues that arise. One of them being this adoption case of a baby whose mother immigrated from China and has been struggling to make a life for herself in this new foreign country. Because of that, there's a lot of clash and tension between Mia and the Richardsons, as well as the entire town, whether it's right that the baby should go to this well-off family or should be returned to the mother. It also made me question my own ideas and thoughts about multicultural families. My own family is multicultural and my dad is also adopted. It made me question to what extent is it okay to have a lack of your own culture embedded into a family? Would my own life be different if I had a dad who was very rooted in Filipino culture like my mom is? This story captures a lot of themes regarding family dynamics, motherhood, multicultural families, adoption, and ignorance and privilege. The next book is Parachutes by Kelly Yang. This is actually a YA book following two girls, Claire and Danny. Claire is a parachute. She is an international student from China and she is pretty wealthy. She has that very typical like crazy rich Asian lifestyle. And Danny, whose mother immigrated and she is Asian American, and she's trying to get into the college of her dreams to make life better for her and her mom. Claire ends up rooming with Danny and there's a lot of clash and tension between the two girls. One partly due to just not fully understanding each other and also their very different lifestyles and upbringing. However, when a traumatic experience happens to both girls, they end up bonding and helping each other heal to get justice. This book is actually the first book that I read that had a character who is Filipino, and that made me so happy, especially for a YA book. The last time I was actively reading was probably around high school, and at that time I was still reading a lot of YA books, and I just remember going into the library or the bookstore and seeing a lot of books written by white authors or books centering around white people. There wasn't a lot of diversity, but y'all, now that I go into a bookstore, there's so much diversity of authors and stories, and that makes my heart so happy. And I feel like I have missed out a lot on the past few years because I haven't been very active in reading, but that's why I'm reading again. Anyways, it made me really happy to see a Filipino character, a character who I related to a lot. The whole eldest daughter, even though Danny is the only daughter, just having that feeling of responsibility to give back to your parents who worked so hard to try to make a better life for you, and pushing herself so hard to get into college and have a good career just to give back to her mom. My heart was torn into pieces because I related to that so much. Just a trigger warning, there is essay content in this book. I love that the author explored the whole women not being believed or heard when they speak up about what happened to them. If you're looking for a quick, easy read, I highly recommend Parachutes. I'm not going into the order that I read these books. I'm just going by what's next on the bookshelf. Next book I'm going to talk about is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This book made me cry so much. My heart was torn into many pieces multiple times. This story is a multi-generational story, and I love books that are multi-generational, especially generational trauma. It starts off in Korea, and the whole plot starts when Sunja gets married and moves to Japan, leaves her family. However, because this was set during the Japanese colonization of Korea, when she goes to Japan, she faces a lot of discrimination, thus leading to a lot of hardship and struggle to starting a new life. What I really loved about this book was the whole theme of identity. There's this loss of identity, leaving your motherland and kind of missing who you were before. There's also hiding part of your identity in order to succeed or try to fit in, almost being ashamed of being who you are. And I love how those two ideas of identity are constantly talked about through the book, kind of like a tug of war. It also made me reflect on my own identity. Even though I am very proud of being Filipino, sometimes depending on the situation, especially when I was younger due to my own ignorance, I would try to kind of minimize my Filipino-ness in order to fit in. As I said, my dad was adopted, so I do have a non-Filipino last name, and at first that can be very useful, especially during a phone call, like for an interview. But as soon as they see me and that I am not a white person, everything changes. I did watch the series on Apple TV, and I would say it's all right. I didn't know that it only covered a portion of the book. So if you read this book and want to watch the TV series, I would wait until the entire book has been converted to a TV show, because I think they only cover like the first part of Sunja's life. So if you want to use your free trial, I would wait until the entire series is completed. The next book is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali, and this is a beautiful love story following two teenagers, and unfortunately, due to the political state of their country, they end up getting separated and not seeing each other until years later. Roya ends up leaving and goes to college to the US, and she tries to spend the rest of her life moving on and trying to forget her very first love. I also love how this book kind of talks about feeling of missing home and missing your family, wishing that they were there for those big important moments of your life, especially when you're in a different country and it's not easy to bring your family over here whenever you need them. There was a part in the book where she was longing for some spices because she was trying to cook food that her mom used to make, and I don't know, that was just very heartwarming, because I think that food, especially for Asian Americans, is a way to reconnect with their roots and their culture. Sometimes food is the only way to get to know one's history and past. I wish I paid more attention to cooking when I was growing up, just hanging out at the kitchen and watching my mom cook. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, so I am trying to learn how to cook Filipino food on my own. What I also really liked about the book was the theme of discrimination, especially what Roya faced, and also trying to make a career in STEM, being a woman of color. This book really captures what young love is like and feeling that loss of young love. I will say there is a good ending to this if you love reading a book that has good endings. Although I'm starting to appreciate books that has bad endings actually, because it's not traditional. I feel like we always expect a good ending, but sometimes, like some K-dramas, 2521, I'm looking at you, they just don't have a good ending and you have to live with it. The Great Reclamation by Rachel Heng. I actually just finished this today. I was trying so hard to read this book in time so I can include it in this video. But this is set in Singapore during the 1940s. I think it's 1940s. I put the cover on backwards. Does anyone else take off the cover so that way you won't ruin the edges while you're holding the book? It was set during the British colonial rule and the political state of Singapore at that time. Similar to the stationery shop, this story follows Abun, who falls in love with his classmate, and he follows her to all these political rallies, political events. At some point they part ways. And this just goes to show how politics, colonialism, imperialism, all the other isms can have an effect on relationships and family and how it can tear families apart sometimes. He has a choice of following the new rulers in order to make a better life for himself or continue his old way of lifestyle, knowing that things are going to change. I really liked this book and I thought it was a very unglamorized version of Crazy Rich Asians. The writing and the details of the fisherman community just reminds me of our place back in the Philippines, since we live right next to Laguna de Bay, which is the biggest lake in the Philippines. There is a lot of fishermen there. Whenever I go to the market, there's always fish. I always see boats out early in the morning. I don't know, as I was reading, I kind of got flashbacks of what it was like back in the Philippines, even remembering the scent and like the breeze that I would feel just standing next to the lake. There are some heart-wrenching scenes in this book, but at this point, will I ever read a book that doesn't have a heart-wrenching scene? The next book I'm going to recommend, which I feel like people have already read it or have seen it recommended everywhere, I've seen it everywhere on Bookstagram, is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a very magical book, and it's about this cafe where you can time travel back to the past if you are seated in this one specific seat in the cafe. The story is divided into 4 parts, each part focusing on one character who wants to go back to the past, and just the reasons that people want to go back to the past is very applicable and very realistic, I feel like. For example, wanting to go back to hear why somebody broke up with you, or wanting to go back because of something that you regret, or to see someone for the very last time. As human beings, we all have some of those thoughts where if only I can go back in time and do this one thing, and I think this book captures that really well. This is a series. This is the first book in the series, so if you do like this book, check out the other books as well. This next book, which I'm sure you've heard already, is Crying in hmart by Michelle Zauner. This book is a memoir following the lead singer Michelle Zauner of Japanese Breakfast. And this talks about her journey with grief when she lost her mom, and also reflecting back on her past. What I love about this book is probably the food and just the relationship that she has with food in order to connect with her mom. And there were instances where she would cook for her mom, try to cook some of her favorite meals. And just as I said before, food can be a way to connect to one's culture or even family. I read this book when I was feeling pretty homesick, so there was a lot of moments where I cried and resonated with what was being said in the book. I wish I paid more attention to cooking when I was growing up, just hanging out at the kitchen and watching my mom cook. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, so I am trying to learn how to cook Filipino food on my own. I think what resonated a lot with me was just being a teenage daughter. I feel like at some point we've gone through kind of like a rebellious mean phase towards our moms. On top of the emotions that were discussed in the book, she also talks about being Korean American. There was a part where she used to love and embrace her Korean features up until a point where she started to kind of hide her Korean features. And you know what? I felt that. Growing up in the US, we're exposed to a lot of Western media, Western beauty standards, and I remember when I was in high school, I would only watch Western YouTubers, beauty gurus, and I would try to recreate their looks, but I never fully felt confident. And it was probably because I didn't have the same features as them. Some colors also didn't look good on my skin tone. There was also talk about language and not being able to communicate properly with her family. And one comment that I have on language being Asian American is that we shouldn't shame someone for not being able to speak a language or understand a language. Having to juggle two different cultures, having to even learn two different languages can be very challenging, and also kind of makes you wonder if you are one culture enough versus the other culture. Would I be any less of a Filipino if I didn't speak or understand Tagalog? This is the first memoir I've ever read, and I'm glad this is the one that I picked up. Okay, so I don't know what happened to the clip. I think I didn't notice that the SD card ran out of room, and I continued talking about it, but I did mention this one book, Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Rebai. This is probably my favorite out of all of the books that I read just because it hits close to home a lot. This book follows a teenage boy. He is Filipino American and he goes back to the Philippines to discover the truth of his cousin's murder. This is set during the reign of President Duterte. If you don't know about the Philippines political climate at this time, I will leave some links down below that explains everything, but basically he's basically a dictator. I call him President Doo-Doo. I know that's very immature, but he is just a very shitty president. Speaking of what I just said, this book covers the opinions that a lot of people on the Western side has, which is that he is a dictator, he has very unfair ways of leading, and the book made a comment about how this is very westernized, how people don't really see the true extent of what's going on in the Philippines, which is more than just a bad president. During this time was the drug war, where basically people who are using drugs or who are accused of using drugs were basically killed. A lot of these people didn't get a proper trial or even get a trial. Some of them didn't even have evidence against them. It was based off of accusations or just hunches that this person might be using. There is a serious drug problem in the Philippines, but how a lot of Filipinos see it is that they are just bad for the country. But the easy solution to get rid of the bad in the country is just by killing them off. That's not going to get rid of the root of the problem, which is institutional and structural. Also, there's just a lot of corrupt politicians in the Philippines. Back to the plot of the book. So Jay goes back to the Philippines to find the truth about his cousin, and he uncovers a lot more about the drug war and also learns a little bit more about himself and his culture. What I really love this book is that self-awareness and learning more about who you are, your identity. I know I talk about identity a lot. That's just my favorite thing. I know that I said earlier that we shouldn't judge people for not being able to speak a language or not fully knowing about their culture, their roots. But this book did make a point that made me kind of reflect a little bit. Basically, this book has this idea that even if you are very intact with your culture and roots, because you don't live in your motherland. For example, for me, because I don't live in the Philippines, I didn't actually grow up there, I will never understand the full extent of what Filipinos are going through because I live in the US. And living in the US comes with a lot of privileges. Yes, it comes with hardships, but we also have to acknowledge that we are privileged to live here to begin with. I don't know, at first I was a little offended because I'm like, I'm a Filipino all the way, I know what's going on in the country, I know the way of life there. I let it sink in a little bit more, and the author is right. I will not ever fully understand what's going on over there and why people might think the way they think, and that is okay. There's a lot of issues in the US that I could focus on. This next book is All My Rage by Sabatir. This book kind of goes back and forth between present and past. The present going back and forth between Sal and Noor's point of view as they are two best friends, and the past from Sal's mom's point of view. Sal and Noor are best friends, and when Noor confesses her love for Sal, they drift apart for a little bit, but the passing of Sal's mom brings them back together. It's a story of young love and some regrets from the past. If things could have been done differently, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation type of thing. A series of events follows Sal's mom's passing, and because of her passing, Sal's trying to keep the motel that his mom ran alive, bringing back Noor into his life. The book also highlights the discrimination that Pakistanis face in the US and the stereotypes and beliefs that people have towards Pakistanis. Just a trigger warning, there are some scenes of abuse in this book. The next two books I don't have physical copies of as I borrowed them from the library, but this next one is Yoke by Mary H.K. Choi. This story follows two sisters, Jane and June, who are pretty estranged towards each other, but because of June's recent cancer diagnosis, Jane ends up living with June, which in a way saves Jane a little bit. She is a college student going to fashion school, is hanging out with the wrong people, and she also struggles with an eating disorder. Speaking of which, another trigger warning of this book, there is a scene with a very heavy chapter on eating disorders, and it was personally hard for me to read too. Both of what the sisters are experiencing and dealing with kind of brings them together. I think the author just did a really good job of capturing what it could really be like for someone who is experiencing depression or cancer, and it's not a very happy book, but that can be the reality of someone who are experiencing those things. It talks a little bit about being Korean American, how parents can sometimes have very high standards for children, and that can have a toll on one's mental health, and especially on someone's physical appearances. The next book is called The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi. This follows Lakshmi set in India during the 1950s, I think? Yes, 1950s. Lakshmi escaped an abusive marriage and she left to try to create a life for herself. She established a very well henna artist business, and she is the most popular henna artist among this group of wealthy women. She knows that her reputation is very important for her business. One day her husband finds her and she finds out that she has a little sister that she's met for the very first time. Her little sister is not used to this world. She has a very high spirit and a very different character, and because of that, Lakshmi's business is kind of threatened after a series of events that follow. It has a beautiful story about sisterhood, especially when two sisters were kind of estranged or have never met each other, how they come to accept and love each other. What I love about this book is the independence that Lakshmi has, her trying to build her own name when she had nothing to begin with. I haven't read the other two books, but after reading The Henna Artist, I definitely want to pick up the others. This next book I have been super excited about, and I'm finally glad I got my hands on it. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to read this before filming this video, but it is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I'm just going to read the blurb because of course I haven't read it, so I can't give my full thoughts and opinions on it. Hi, it's me again. I did a very bad job talking about Yellowface. At this point, I was talking for 3 hours now, and I was also very hungry, so I didn't talk about the book properly, and I actually did read it. I am about halfway through now, and I can give my thoughts and opinions. First of all, I love this book so much. Oh my gosh, it is so good. You have to pick it up. This book starts off with June and Athena. They met each other at Yale and were basically on the same track. They both wanted to be authors, they both end up publishing books, but Athena was more successful than June. Unfortunately, Athena passes away due to an accident, and June takes this opportunity to steal Athena's current book that she's working on. Athena's original story covered a lot about Chinese laborers during World War I. June tweaks the story a little bit and eventually gets it published. This book covers a great deal about microaggressions, racism, discrimination, and just the stereotypes and assumptions that people have towards Asian Americans, especially in the publishing industry. This book is so good. I might actually finish it today, and I'm a pretty slow reader. I just started it maybe 2 days ago, although the first day didn't really count because I just read one chapter right before I was going to bed. I just wanted to feel good about myself for starting the book, but I got most of my reading done yesterday. So I highly recommend picking this up. I know I haven't finished it yet, but I think the hype is worth it. Well, that is it for my Asian American book recommendations. I am going to end this video here because my camera is dying. It is literally blinking red right now, but if you have other book recommendations that you think I should read or just for other people to read, please comment down below. I would love to continue expanding my Asian American genre. Happy AAPI Heritage Month, and I will see you in my next video.